My transition from Philadelphia to New York was in the early to mid 90s. I kind of knew early on that I wanted to, like my first or second year of high school, I was playing a lot more. And I was like, I know I want to go to New York, because, before that, my father would take me up. He was playing, sometimes we do week engagements at Sweet Basil's. He would play with Abdullah Ibrahim, or he would play with Steve Torre at at the Blue Note for a week. So I was going up there, and I was hearing all these great musicians who were living in New York and playing. I remember one time in particular, growing up, my favorite drummer, and pretty much still to this day, was Elvin Jones. And so one instance, my father was playing. It was a double bill at the Blue Note. It was Steve Torre's sextet he had with Cyrus Chestnut, uh, Ray Drummond, and Ben Riley. Steve, my father, and Akua Toure playing cello. And my dad was like, all right, man, today's the day. You're going to go up and meet Elvin. So I was like, oh, shoot, this is killing. I get to meet my hero. And, I remember, hearing my father sitting, and he's like, all right, let's go upstairs. And I went upstairs to the dressing rooms and knocked on the door. And he opened the door, and he, and my dad introduced me. He's like, look, Elvin, this is my son, Johnathan Blake. He's studying drums. He's learning to play. I'm okay. I'm just about 14 or so, but I was like half the size basically, and I was really small. So I guess, Elvin thought, oh, who's this little kid? So he's like, hey, come over here and sit on my lap. And I'm like thinking to myself, like, sit on my lap, man. I'm a teenager, man. Like, what's going on? But I came over, and he gave me one of these like great big bear hugs, and it was like, man, you felt like you knew this guy from forever. He was like an instant uncle, or or a grandfather or something like. And I remember after we sat and talked for a while, and I just had all these questions about, what was it like to play with Train and Jimmy, and I was so curious because I was always fascinated about how that group, that quartet, John Coltrane's quartet, played together. I was like, that was like one of the first records I bought was Love Supreme. When I got my allowance, that was one of the first records I checked out. So I had all these questions because I was like, man, I've never really heard anything like that, and I was just so fascinated by the way they played together. So we sat and talked for a while, and then after when it was time for him to go back on, he was like, man, you come down with me, and he sat me on stage on top of his hardware case. He had like this he like this, I guess it was like it wasn't like a soft bag, it was a hard case, like hardware bag. So he sat me up there, and like for the whole set, I just watched him play, and he would drop sticks, and I pick one up and hand it to him, and man, I was like, man, I'm sitting like less than 2 feet from my hero, and so I knew pretty much early on, like, oh, I have to be in New York. This is where it's at, and so when I did make the transition, I had made a lot of contacts, through my father and various other people, and so when I did make the transition, there was some difficult times. I was going to school at William Patterson University. Um, I got a scholarship to go there, and Rufus Reed, who I had met very early on, I used to go to these jazz camps at in Stockton University in South Jersey, and he was there one of the times, and I got to meet him and his family, his wife Doris, and their son Michelle, and he looked out for me, So when it was time for me to make that transition to go to college and move, north from Philly, he was right there. He looked out for me, and so it kind of made the transition a bit smoother than maybe the norm, and it was just beautiful. I was doing my coursework. I was getting in late, sometimes because I was hanging out at night, going to all these different clubs and going to these different jam sessions. But slowly but surely, it started to pay off. With jazz, it's a lot by word of mouth. Like, oh man, here's this new cat you got to check out. He's on the scene. Come and check him out. Come and hear him. So it's for me, it was an interesting time. It was I think now it's definitely changed, but I always say that things come full circle. But back then I felt like there was more places to play. You could go to Brooklyn. There was a Dean Street jam session, and then later on was Up Over jam session in Brooklyn. And they had Smalls, Cleopatra's Needle. There was so much going on. So, there was a lot of a lot of time for you to kind of like develop and and hopefully gradually get better as a musician. My name is Johnathan Blake.